Hi. So today we're going to be looking at the Pulsar-Modular P42 plugin. Now this is an interesting one. When I first saw it, I thought it was just another emulation of a console or a transformer, and there are a lot of those out there. But it's way more than that. And once I spent some time playing around with it, I realized just how much it can do. It can do a lot more than it seems. And it brings something really quite unique to the table. And I went from thinking, oh, I don't know if I'll use this, to finding myself using it on every mix. So it's got a transformer emulation at its heart, a transformer that was a famous one from a lot of revered gear from the 1960s, and also I believe part of the Neve sound, the transformer that's part of the Neve sound. And it's very deeply modeled. A really long period of R&D went into modeling it on a very complex level, and it really reacts to the frequency content and the amplitude content of the input signal in just the way that a real transformer does. So an enormous amount of R&D and effort's gone into that. But it also has 3 shelving EQs, a low shelf and 2 high shelves, and a low and high pass filter. Now what's interesting about those is that they interact with the transformer. So they have their own harmonic content that they bring with them, which changes depending on the frequency that you boost and cut, where you move the frequencies to on the shelves, and also interacts with the transformer. So there's a lot of you could say organic or non-linear interaction going on there in the same way that you get happening in hardware. But if that isn't enough, there is also a second level of harmonics which can be added, which is a range of different complex harmonic patterns which you can move through, which can be placed at the beginning or the end of the signal chain, and they also interact with the transformer. So there's a lot of rich interaction there. And what I found with it is that it's subtle, yes, but used across a mix and used as an EQ, it really brings density and sheen and clarity in ways that nothing else does. So yes, we're going to have a look at this. And before we do, if you find these videos useful, please do subscribe and like the video and ring the bell, and that's really helpful to me and really appreciated. And let's have a look. Okay, so here we are with the P42. Now this is modeled on a transformer which is represented here. I quite like this graphic here. And the rest of it is quite an unusual and quirky layout, but and at first I thought there's kind of a lot going on here, but I actually find it quite functional and easy to get around once I got used to it. It's quite easy to just get to everything. So I'm going to go through the controls so you can see what it's got. It's got a lot more than at first meets the eye, sound-wise as well as controls. So starting with the EQs, we've got a high-pass filter here that goes from 15 Hertz all the way up to 500, and a low pass here from 20K down to 150. You can switch these on and off. And the next EQ is a high shelf here called Air, and this goes from 5K up to 12K, and the boost is here. We've then got 2 other shelving EQs down here, which can be switched off and on here. This one goes from 40 Hertz up to 5K, and it be boosted here up to 10 dB boost. And then here we've got a high shelf that goes from 5K down to 150, and same boost here. Now for saturation, first of all these EQs saturate independently in their own way, in their own different way, and that changes depending on the frequency and the boost. Now here we've got a drive. Now this actually drives the transformer, and you can actually reduce the drive but the default is 0. But basically, it's the kind of default amount of saturation, and then you can boost it quite a bit, 12 dB boost. And cutting it is obviously going to kind of clean it up. So that saturation is there all the time, and you can just add to it or take away from it. And that interacts with what goes on with these EQs. So they add their own saturation and they interact with the saturation and the harmonics going on within the transformer. Now up here we've got another saturation circuit, and this one's different. I don't know the details about what this is based on, but I suspect it's based on a bunch of other hardware and related harmonic patterns. But what I do know is it's got a whole range of different harmonic patterns, and as you move it, it gets more and more complex, and that's kind of illustrated by this here, and simple to complex. And it basically adds more noticeable saturation, but it just changes the quality and texture of the saturation as well. This also interacts with all the rest of the saturation, so you've got a very complex set of interactive nonlinear things reacting to the input signals, amplitude, envelope, and frequency content. So it's quite a deep plugin in terms of the harmonics, and if you go into Plugin Doctor and mess around, you'll see what I mean. It's a lot of complex stuff going on. Now, right next to this, you've got this output control. This moves this so that this extra saturation circuit is before the EQ or after it, and that changes the sound pretty significantly. Now, so that covers like the basic saturation and EQ, but we've also got some other things. We've got this here, which changes the kind of EQ to make it more smooth here, more punchy on revision B. So this is a mid-side control. If you put it on mid, the processing will all be on the mid signal and the side will be clean, bypassed. You'll hear it, the dry signal. If you put it to the side, it's the other way around. The sides will be processed and the mid will be unaffected. If you press this isolate button here, that means that if you have it on side, you're just going to hear the sides, so you won't hear the mid signal. Or vice versa, you put it on mid, you're just going to hear the mid and you won't hear the sides. So the idea behind that is that you can have two instances of this in series. And the first one could have processing on the mid and the other on the side, and that would mean that the mid would pass straight through, and you'd have, and the side would pass straight through, meaning that you'd have separate processing on the mid and the side, and that could be really handy for mastering. So that's handy. And what else have we got here? I think I've covered. Okay, yeah, we've got 2 times oversampling here, and we've got 2 settings here. One vintage, which has less filtering, a less steep filter, and it does let through some aliasing, and Intel, which has a steeper filter and it gets rid of all of it. Checked out on Plugin Doctor, and the aliasing is really not bad, even without ×2 on, unless you push it right to the extremes, and even then it's not bad. And yeah, with vintage, it doesn't really cut back on the aliasing, the lower down aliasing much. It does the higher aliasing in the higher end seems to change on Plugin Doctor, but the lower ones, like below the fundamental, don't. But on Intel, it's just gone, no aliasing. But they're strong. They're very keen on explaining in the manual that you should use your ears, and oversampling and these different filterings aren't necessarily better than the other. And I think there's a growing kind of feeling amongst a lot of engineers that aliasing isn't necessarily that bad of a thing. It depends how much of it you have, and it depends, whether it actually does sound bad. It may. Some people actually think it sounds good. It's just a different kind of distortion, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. I personally try to keep it to a minimum, and this certainly can entirely remove it, but you get more CPU usage. But I'm not finding the CPU usage on this bad at all. It's very low from what I can tell so far. I've been using it quite a lot on mixes, and really not noticing any CPU hit any more than usual. So what else have we got? We've got this. Now this, automatically gain compensates the gain. So if you adjust things and the volume goes up, this pulls it back down in what I find a pretty effective manner. I asked the developer like why this couldn't just happen automatically, and there seems to be some technical reason why that wouldn't work out very well, and a lot of these things do not have that. Few of them do. So actually, like, full credit to them for putting this in, because it's really great to have it. And we got the usual manual stuff up here, and you've got an A/B like memory thing here, reverse the phase, all pretty useful stuff. And then finally we've got a metering section. If you click here, you've got a metering here which has LUFS and RMS and peak, and pretty handy to have that there. So now let's have a listen, and I'm going to have a listen to a mix here with percussion. We've got a bunch of percussion here, and I'm going to start with it out. So you can see these are all bypassed on these selected channels, and I can bring them all in at the same time, and so what I'm going to do, I'm going to play it and then bring them in. Now it sounds like it gets louder, but it really doesn't get louder. If you listen to these soloed, I've volume matched it really closely, and what's actually happening is it's getting more present and easy to hear, and you're hearing detail more, which kind of gives you the impression it's louder when it actually isn't. So that's what's one of the great things about this this plugin. Okay, so let's have a listen with it out, and then I'll bring it in. So you can hear it really is much easier to hear that percussion with those in than it was with that without. Now let's move over. I'm going to bring these back in, and let's move over to the horns. Okay, so I've selected the brass tracks here, and I'm going to bring them in and out, start with them in. I'm going to bring in the P42s on all of them, and we'll start with it in and then bring them out. So hopefully you can hear that what it's doing is it's adding a nice sweetened sheen to the brass. It's fairly subtle, but to me it really just makes it sound nicer, kind of posher, higher end sounding recording. It also gels the brass together a bit. Without it, they sound a little more distant. Again, it sounds a bit like they're louder, but I've actually volume matched them each individually carefully, so it just that it has that effect when there's a bit more density in there, and there's a little bit more gelling and presence coming through. So again, over a whole mix, this really adds up. You can hear it on the brass, even though it's fairly subtle. You can hear it on the percussion. It was even a bit more obvious. When you add it up over a whole mix, there's a big difference between just everything sounding a bit lusher and more present, and the density and gel being more apparent. So finally I'll do the bass. So let's have a listen to the bass. I'm going to solo the bass this time. So again, you can really hear that there's more presence and density. The tone of the instrument is coming out at you more, and it's just sounding kind of lusher and nicer, and yeah. So let's now have a listen to it on the whole mix. Okay, so I'm going to start with it out, and then I'm going to bring it in. So here we're applying some EQ, and you can really hear that it just enhances. You really miss it when you bypass it. But when it's in, it's not just EQing, it's just adding a lovely finish to everything. It just sounds bigger, it sounds more gelled, it sounds more present, you can hear more detail. All the things that you want from saturation. But to me, the flavor of this is really, really different from something like the black box, or plug-in line black box, or say the saturation from soft tube. And there's a bunch of good saturators out there, but they all sound different from each other. And to me, this really sounds different. It sounds compared to those others, which I think are great, and I use them all the time. This one has a smoother, to my ears, smoother and lusher sound to it. And it's got the way it works with the density and brings out the tone of instruments is different and really nice, really, really unique and nice. So, I mean, I work a lot with saturators in both single instruments and in mastering. So, yeah, to me they're really important, and the different qualities they bring out are really important. And I pretty much try every saturator that comes out that's, at least recommended to me by somebody or by one of a company whose other plugins I respect. So I've tried a lot of them, and most of them to me don't really, they either do pretty much what one of the others is already doing, or they don't sound that great to me. They don't sound as good as, say, Black Box or the saturator from Soft Tube. Those two I think are really great. There are some other good ones as well. But this one to me really brings something new to the party. It's got a very unique flavor of its own and a density of its own, and I'm finding myself using it a lot. So I'm gonna now have a mess around with this so you can hear what it does if I change the controls. hopefully you can hear, like, the range of tonal changes you can make with this are pretty huge, and it doesn't sound like anything else I've got in terms of EQ and saturation, and the way the saturation and the EQ sounds really different and really shape the tone here in a lot of ways that I'm finding really useful. I love the way everything interacts when you push the tone, the way the high pass filters work with the shelving filters, and the way when you push the tone and move with the saturation, how you can hear it really working nicely. In the highs, a really kind of creamy, smooth way, really gelling things together, and in the lows, a real punch and weight coming in there, and a real nice density in the low end. So yeah, I would recommend it. You give it a try and see what you think. And I hope you found this useful. And if you did, please give the video a like and subscribe and ring the bell, and that's really helpful to me and greatly appreciated. And I hope to see you next time.